My name is Private First Class Tommy Malone, United States Army, 1st Battalion, 12th Infantry Regiment, 4th Infantry Division, Vietnam 1969. I was a rifleman assigned to Bravo Company conducting routine resupply operations between Firebase Crook and Firebase Susan in the Central Highlands when our convoy hit what intelligence later confirmed was the most carefully planned and devastatingly executed enemy ambush of that entire year. What should have been a simple 3-mile movement along a dirt road turned into 15 minutes of absolute hell that killed 31 Americans, wounded another 43, and taught me more about the nature of combat, fear, and human courage than 13 months of previous combat experience ever had. This is the story of those 15 minutes. Not just what happened, but why it happened. The intelligence failures, the tactical mistakes, the split-second decisions that determined who lived and who died. This is what an ambush looks like from inside the kill zone. What happens when everything goes wrong simultaneously, when training and instinct are the only things standing between survival and becoming another name on the wall in Washington. The Central Highlands of Vietnam in 1969 were dangerous terrain. Mountainous, covered in thick jungle, cut by rivers and ravines that made movement difficult and observation nearly impossible beyond a few yards. The North Vietnamese Army controlled large sections of the highlands, using them as infiltration routes from Laos and Cambodia into South Vietnam's interior. American forces operated from a network of firebases, fortified artillery positions scattered across the highlands that provided fire support and served as bases for infantry operations against enemy forces. Firebase Crook sat on a hilltop overlooking Route 509, a dirt road that connected several American positions in the area. It was home to about 200 soldiers, artillery crews manning 105mm howitzers, infantry companies providing security, support personnel, keeping everything running. Firebase Susan was 3 miles northeast along Route 509, similar size and composition. Between them was jungle, mountains, and a road that wound through terrain perfect for ambush. I'd been at Firebase Crook for 2 weeks when we got the mission on October 15, 1969. Bravo Company would escort a supply convoy from Crook to Susan. 5 trucks carrying ammunition, food, medical supplies, and mail. Standard operation. We'd done it dozens of times. The road was swept for mines every morning by engineer teams. Recent patrol activity in the area had found no significant enemy presence. Intelligence assessed the threat level as moderate, meaning there might be some enemy forces around but nothing suggesting a major threat. That assessment was catastrophically wrong. Our convoy consisted of the 5 supply trucks plus 3 gun trucks, modified 2.5-ton trucks with armor plates welded to the sides and .50 caliber machine guns mounted in the bed for protection against ambush. Bravo Company provided infantry security, about 120 soldiers split between riding in the trucks and walking alongside in 2 columns, one on each side of the road. I was in the left side column, 4th man back, carrying my M16 and about 60 pounds of gear in the humid heat that made every movement feel like wading through water. Lieutenant James Crawford commanded Bravo Company. He was 24 years old, West Point graduate, on his first combat tour, smart and brave, but maybe not as experienced as he should have been for what we were about to face. His platoon leaders were a mix. Some experienced NCOs who'd been in country for months, some brand new second lieutenants who'd arrived within the last few weeks. The company's sergeant, First Sergeant William Bill Martinez, was a veteran with 2 previous tours who'd seen more combat than anyone else in the company and had the kind of sixth sense for danger that only comes from surviving situations where others didn't. Martinez didn't like this mission, didn't like the terrain we'd be moving through, didn't like that we were conducting the operation at the same time of day we'd done previous resupply runs, didn't like that recent intelligence had been quiet about enemy activity, because in his experience, when intelligence went quiet it usually meant the enemy was preparing something big and maintaining radio silence to avoid detection. "Sir, request we delay departure until we can get air cover overhead," Martinez said to Crawford during the pre-mission briefing. "Route 509 runs through perfect ambush terrain, and we haven't had eyes on it for 48 hours. I'd feel better with Cobras on station before we move." Crawford considered it, but shook his head. "Helicopter support is committed to operations west of here. We don't have air available for convoy escort. But engineers swept the road this morning, Patrols haven't reported contact in this sector for a week, and we'll have the gun trucks for immediate fire support if something happens. We'll be fine. Famous last words in Vietnam. We'll be fine usually meant you were about to discover exactly how not fine things could get. We departed Firebase Crook at 0900 hours. The convoy rolled out through the gates and onto Route 509, trucks grinding along in low gear, infantry walking in columns on both sides, everyone alert but not overly concerned. This was routine. We'd done this before. Nothing was going to happen. For the first mile, nothing did happen. The road wound through relatively open terrain, rice paddies on both sides, good visibility in all directions. A few Vietnamese civilians working in the paddies waved as we passed. Some of our guys waved back. Standard Vietnam patrol experience, passing through villages and agricultural areas where you couldn't tell who was friendly and who was VC, where the same people waving at you during the day might be shooting at you that night. The second mile, the terrain changed. The road entered jungle, thick vegetation closing in on both sides, visibility dropping to maybe 20 yards. The columns tightened up, everyone more alert now, scanning the tree for threats. This was where an ambush would happen, if it was going to happen. This was the danger zone. Martinez was walking near the front of the column, constantly scanning, his M16 at the ready. I saw him stop several times, looking at something in the vegetation, listening. Once he held up a fist, the signal to halt, and the entire convoy stopped while he studied something in the jungle. After a minute, he waved us forward. False alarm. Or maybe not. Maybe he'd seen signs of enemy presence, but not enough to justify turning back and aborting the mission. We made it through the second mile. Entered the third. Firebase, Susan was maybe 15 minutes away now. Almost there. Almost safe. That's when everything went to hell. The first indication was sound. A sharp crack from the jungle on our right side followed immediately by an explosion as an RPG hit the second truck in the convoy. Before anyone could react, the jungle on both sides erupted with automatic weapons fire. Hundreds of muzzle flashes. The distinctive crack of AK-47s mixing with heavier machine gun fire. Bullets tearing through the air, hitting trucks, hitting soldiers, hitting everything. We'd driven straight into a perfectly planned L-shaped ambush. The enemy had positioned themselves along both sides of the road, concentrated heavy weapons at the front of the kill zone to disable lead vehicles and stop the convoy, had mines and claymores positioned to catch anyone trying to escape. We were trapped in the middle of it with nowhere to go, taking fire from both sides, soldiers dropping before they even understood what was happening. I hit the ground, rolled toward the ditch on the left side of the road, started returning fire at muzzle flashes in the jungle. Around me, other soldiers were doing the same, training taking over, muscle memory from dozens of drills and previous contacts dictating actions, even when the conscious mind was overwhelmed by chaos and fear. The sound was overwhelming. Gunfire, explosions, men screaming, wounded soldiers calling for medics, squad leaders yelling orders, truck engines revving as drivers tried to move out of the kill zone or died at their wheels. The lead gun truck opened up with its .50 caliber, raking the jungle with heavy fire, trying to suppress the ambush. An RPG hit it square on, penetrated the armor plating, detonated inside. The truck exploded, ammunition cooking off in secondary explosions, killing the entire crew instantly. The lead supply truck, now without protection, took concentrated fire and ground to a halt. The driver slumped over the wheel. Move! Get off the road! Return fire! Martinez was screaming, trying to organize a defense, trying to get soldiers out of the kill zone and into positions where they could fight effectively instead of being slaughtered in the open. I fired at targets I could barely see, fired at muzzle flashes and movement, and anywhere I thought enemy soldiers might be. Didn't know if I was hitting anything. Didn't have time to aim carefully. Just put rounds down range while trying to find cover, trying to survive the next 5 seconds, trying to do something, anything, that might keep me alive. An enemy machine gun had our section of the column zeroed. I watched it tear through soldiers trying to reach cover, watched men go down in sprays of blood, watched the soldier next to me, a kid named Patterson who'd been in country for 3 weeks, take rounds through the chest and collapse without making a sound. His eyes were open, staring at nothing, already dead. I kept firing, kept moving. reach the ditch, and press myself flat, making myself as small a target as possible while still able to shoot. Other soldiers were in the ditch with me, maybe 8 or 10 of us, returning fire, trying to coordinate, but mostly just fighting individual battles against an enemy we couldn't see clearly, couldn't count, couldn't predict. The ambush was maybe 2 minutes old, but felt like an hour. Tom does that in combat. Stretches or compresses, depending on what's happening. The worst moments last forever. The critical decisions happen in fractions of seconds. You're hyper-aware of everything. Every sound, every movement, every bullet passing close enough to hear, while simultaneously operating on pure instinct because there's no time for conscious thought. Crawford's voice came over the radio, trying to coordinate, trying to get situation reports from platoon leaders, trying to call for artillery support and air cover. But the radio traffic was chaos. Multiple people transmitting simultaneously, calls for medics, reports of casualties, requests for covering fire, everything happening at once, and no clear picture of what was happening or how bad it was. Martinez appeared in the ditch next to me, fired a magazine into the jungle, dropped behind cover to reload. His face was cut, bleeding from shrapnel or fragments, but he was still fighting, still leading. "How many are we facing?" I yelled over the gunfire. "A lot," he yelled back. "Full company at least, maybe battalion. They've got us in a perfect L ambush. Lead elements are stopped. Tail is taking fire. We're stuck in the middle. We need a breakout or we're all dead." He was right. The classic response to an L ambush is to assault through the ambush, to attack the enemy position with such aggression that you break their line and escape the kill zone. But that requires leadership, coordination, fire support. It requires soldiers to charge toward enemy machine guns with the understanding that some will die, but the alternative is everyone dies. It's the kind of decision that looks simple on paper and is almost impossible to execute under fire. Crawford tried. Through the chaos, I heard him on the radio, organizing a counter-assault, calling for one platoon to provide covering fire while another assaulted toward the enemy position on the right side of the road. It might have worked, might have broken the ambush. But before the assault could develop, enemy forces hit us from a direction we hadn't expected, behind us. They'd set up a blocking force on the road we'd just traveled, cutting off our retreat, turning the L ambush into a U, surrounding the convoy on 3 sides. Now we weren't just ambushed. We were trapped, surrounded, taking fire from every direction except back toward Firebase Crook, and that route was blocked. The 15 minutes that followed were the worst of my life. We fought from the ditches, from behind disabled trucks, from whatever cover we could find. Fought with rifles and machine guns and grenades. Fought as individuals and small teams, because larger unit coordination had broken down in the chaos. Fought knowing that every minute we stayed in that kill zone, more of us died, but unable to organize the kind of coordinated breakout that might have saved us. The enemy knew they had us, knew we were trapped and disorganized. They pushed harder, moved closer, concentrated fire on our gun trucks, and anything that looked like leadership or coordination. I saw Crawford go down, hit multiple times while trying to organize a defense. Saw platoon leaders killed, directing their men. Saw squad leaders die, trying to rally soldiers who were pinned down and unable to move. And then, finally, we heard it. The sound that meant survival was possible. The deep thump of helicopter rotors. Cobra gunships inbound. Scrambled from firebase support when Crawford had radioed that we were being overrun. They came in fast and angry, miniguns and rockets hammering the jungle where enemy forces were concentrated, breaking up the ambush, forcing the NVA to pull back or be annihilated from the air. The gunships gave us the window we needed. Martinez, wounded but still functional, organized the survivors into a defensive perimeter around the disabled trucks, established casualty collection points, coordinated with the Cobras overhead to bring fire down on enemy positions while we prepared for extraction or reinforcement. Artillery from Firebase Crook started falling on the jungle around us. Danger close. Close enough that we felt the concussions. Close enough that fragments hit inside our perimeter. But the artillery and air support did what they were supposed to. They broke the enemy's will to continue the fight. The ambush that had seemed coordinated and unstoppable 15 minutes ago dissolved as NVA forces withdrew into the jungle, dragging their casualties, abandoning the kill zone they controlled so completely just minutes before. By the time reinforcements arrived from firebases, another company that had mounted up and raced down Route 509 the moment they heard we were in contact, the fighting had stopped. The enemy was gone. The road was littered with destroyed vehicles, scattered equipment, shell casings, blood, and bodies. So many bodies. We counted 31 Americans killed, 43 wounded, many critically. Of the 120 soldiers in Bravo Company who'd started that convoy escort, only about 40 had made it through unwounded. The casualty rate was catastrophic. The ambush had been one of the most successful enemy operations of that year in the Central Highlands. We'd walked into a perfectly planned trap and paid for it with American lives. The question that haunted me then and haunts me still is, could it have been prevented? Should we have known the ambush was there? Were there signs we missed, intelligence we ignored, precautions we didn't take that might have saved those 31 lives? The answer is complicated. Yes, there were intelligence indicators that enemy forces were operating in that area. Yes, the terrain was obviously dangerous ambush country. Yes, delaying the mission until air support was available would have been the smarter tactical decision. But in Vietnam, every mission involved risk. Every patrol could be ambushed. Every convoy could hit mines or enemy forces. You couldn't operate only when conditions were perfect, because perfect conditions never existed. So you calculated risk, took reasonable precautions, and accepted that sometimes despite doing everything right, soldiers still died. That's the reality of war that civilians don't understand and military planners try to minimize in their after-action reports. Sometimes there's no one to blame. Sometimes soldiers die not because of incompetence or negligence, but because the enemy is smart, motivated, and willing to take risks to kill Americans. Sometimes you do everything by the book and still lose. But understanding that intellectually doesn't make carrying the weight of those 15 minutes any easier. Doesn't stop me from seeing Patterson's dead eyes every time I close mine. Doesn't stop the nightmares about being trapped in that kill zone with bullets tearing through the air and nowhere to hide. Doesn't give meaning to the 31 names that got added to the wall because of what happened on Route 509 on October 15th, 1969. Act 2. The hours after the ambush ended were surreal. We sat in defensive positions along Route 509, waiting for engineers to clear the disabled vehicles, waiting for medevac helicopters to evacuate the wounded, waiting for bodies to be collected and prepared for transport home. Around us, the jungle was quiet again, peaceful even, as if the violence of 15 minutes ago had never happened. Birds were singing. The sun was shining through breaks in the canopy. The world continued turning despite the fact that 31 families were about to receive telegrams that would destroy them. I helped load casualties onto helicopters. The wounded went first, soldiers with catastrophic injuries who die without immediate surgery, soldiers missing limbs, soldiers burned when trucks exploded, soldiers in shock who stared at nothing while medics worked on them. Then came the dead. We handled them carefully, respectfully, wrapping them in ponchos, loading them gently onto helicopters that would take them to graves registration where they'd be processed, identified, prepared for the journey home to families who'd never see them alive again. One of the dead was Lieutenant Crawford. He'd been hit multiple times while trying to organize the defense, had died almost instantly, but not before calling in the fire support request that brought the Cobras that saved the rest of us. He was 24 years old, had been in Vietnam for 4 months, had a wife back home who was pregnant with their first child. That child would grow up never knowing their father, except through photographs and stories from family members who try to make a hero's death mean something to a kid who just wanted their dad. Martinez survived, though his wounds were serious enough that he was eventually medevaced to Japan and then back to the States. Before he left, while we were waiting for his helicopter, he said something I've never forgotten. We did the best we could with what we had. Nobody quit. Nobody ran. Some of us died, but the rest kept fighting. That's all you can ask of soldiers. That has to be enough. I wanted it to be enough. Wanted to believe that fighting hard and not quitting was sufficient justification for the casualties, sufficient meaning to give the deaths purpose. But I couldn't then and can't now fully embrace that belief. Because 31 Americans died in 15 minutes and nothing we achieved in that ambush. No enemy casualties, no territory gained, no strategic objective accomplished, made those deaths anything other than loss. Bravo Company was pulled off the line after the ambush. We were sent to a rear area, for what the Army called reconstitution, replacing casualties, absorbing new soldiers to bring the company back to strength, giving survivors time to process what had happened before sending us back to combat operations. I spent a week in that rear area in a kind of dissociative state, going through the motions of being a soldier while mentally I was still on Route 509 watching Patterson die, watching Crawford go down, fighting in that ditch with Martinez while bullets tore through the air close enough to feel. The new soldiers who arrived to replace our dead looked impossibly young. They were probably the same age I'd been when I arrived in Vietnam 13 months earlier, but they seemed like children, fresh from training, uncertain, eager in that naive way that combat destroys within minutes of first contact. I wanted to warn them, to tell them what combat was really like, to prepare them for the reality that training can't simulate. But I didn't know how. Couldn't find words to explain that fear, that chaos, that particular quality of time during combat when 15 minutes contains more experience than normal people have in years. So I said nothing. Just watched them integrate into the company, take the positions of dead soldiers, try to fit into a unit that had been shattered by casualties and was held together primarily by the bonds between survivors who'd fought together and understood what that meant. We returned to operations after a week, back to the Central Highlands, back to patrols and ambushes and the daily reality of combat in Vietnam. But Bravo Company wasn't the same. The casualties from Route 509 had broken something fundamental. We'd lost leaders, lost friends, lost the sense that we could take casualties and keep functioning as a cohesive unit. We operated mechanically, following orders, conducting missions, but the confidence was gone. Everyone was waiting for the next ambush, the next casualty, the next friend to die. I made it through the remaining 5 months of my tour without being seriously wounded. Saw more combat, lost more friends, participated in operations that probably didn't accomplish anything strategically meaningful, but kept us busy and gave higher command things to report. Counted down the days until my rotation date with the obsessive focus that every short-timer develops. That magical thinking that if you can just make it to your rotation date, you'll be safe, you'll have one, you'll get to go home. I rotated out of Vietnam in March 1970. Flew from Cam Ranh Bay to Travis Air Force Base in California, processed out of the military, put on civilian clothes that felt strange after 13 months in uniform, and tried to resume a life I barely remembered. It didn't work. The person who'd left for Vietnam 14 months earlier wasn't the person who returned. Combat changes you in ways that can't be undone or explained to people who haven't experienced it. You carry things, memories, trauma, guilt, fear, that don't fit into civilian life, that make normal interactions feel false or meaningless, that separate you from people who should be closest but can't understand what you've been through. The ambush at Route 509 became the defining experience of my entire life. Not my whole tour, not even other combat I'd seen that was arguably more intense or dangerous. Just those 15 minutes on October 15th, 1969, when everything went wrong and 31 Americans died, and I survived for reasons I still don't understand and can't justify. Act 3. I'm 76 years old now. The ambush on Route 509 was 56 years ago. More than half a century has passed since that October morning, when I was a 19-year-old private first class walking alongside a convoy through jungle in the Central Highlands of Vietnam, young and scared and trying to do my job well enough that I might survive to make it home. The nightmares have faded with time, not disappeared. They still come occasionally, usually triggered by something random like a backfiring car or a news story about war. But they're not the every-night occurrence they were for the first decade after I came home. The hypervigilance has mellowed. I can sit with my back to a door now, without panic. Can be in crowds without constantly scanning for threats. Can mostly function in the world without combat experience intruding into every moment. But I still carry those 15 minutes. Still see Patterson's eyes staring at nothing. Still hear Martinez yelling orders while bleeding from shrapnel wounds. Still feel the particular terror of being trapped in a kill zone with bullets everywhere and nowhere safe to hide. Still wonder why I survived when 31 others didn't. What made me special or lucky or blessed enough to make it through when soldiers just as young and just as deserving died in that ditch on Route 509. I've visited the wall in Washington 3 times. Found the names of the soldiers who died in that ambush. Touched the cold granite. Tried to communicate something. Apology, respect, remembrance, to men who can't hear anymore, whose stories ended on a dirt road in Vietnam while mine continued. Each time I visit, I'm struck by how inadequate the memorial feels. Names on a wall, even names on a beautiful and dignified wall, can't capture who these men were, what they meant to families and friends, what was lost when they died at 19 or 20 or 24 years old in a war most Americans wanted to forget. I tried once to contact Patterson's family, to tell them what their son's last moments were like, to give them some closure or comfort or understanding. I wrote a letter explaining that he'd been a good soldier, that he hadn't suffered, that his death had been quick. All lies, but comfortable lies, the kind families need to hear. The letter came back undelivered. They'd moved, or I had the wrong address, or maybe they didn't want to hear from someone who'd survived when their son hadn't. I don't blame them if that's what it was. Survivor guilt works both ways. I got married eventually, had kids, built a career, did all the things you're supposed to do to have a normal American life. But Vietnam was always there, always present in ways my family couldn't fully understand. They knew I'd been there, knew I'd seen combat, knew it affected me, but they couldn't know what those 15 minutes on Route 509 meant, what weight I carried every day, what images played in my head when I couldn't sleep or when I zoned out during normal activities and suddenly wasn't in 21st century America anymore, but back in that ditch in 1969. My wife tried to understand. My kids tried when they got old enough. But there's a limit to what can be communicated across the divide between those who've experienced combat and those who haven't. You can describe what happened factually, the ambush, the casualties, the fighting, but you can't convey the emotional and psychological reality of it. The way time worked differently, the way fear felt, the way making split-second decisions about who to help or where to shoot determined who lived and died. I went to therapy starting in the 1990s when VA finally started recognizing PTSD as a legitimate consequence of combat rather than weakness or failure to adjust. The therapy helped, gave me tools to manage the nightmares and hypervigilance, helped me understand that carrying guilt about surviving wasn't the same as being responsible for others' deaths, taught me that healing doesn't mean forgetting or dishonoring the dead, but rather integrating the experience in ways that allow you to function. But healing from combat trauma isn't linear, isn't a process you complete and then move on. It's ongoing work that continues decades after the events that caused it. Some days are better than others. Some years are better than others. But Vietnam, specifically those 15 minutes on Route 509, is always there, always part of who I am, always influencing how I see the world and my place in it. The last surviving member of my squad from Route 509, a soldier named Mike Torres who'd been in a different section of the convoy during the ambush, died 2 years ago from cancer. We'd stayed in touch sporadically over the decades, had attended a few reunions together, had the kind of bond that only comes from shared combat experience. When he died, I felt like I'd lost the last person who truly understood what that day meant, who carried the same memories, who could validate that my experiences were real and not distorted by time and trauma. Now I'm the last one. The last from my immediate squad who was there, who fought in that ambush, who survived. That carries its own weight. The responsibility to remember accurately, to tell the story truthfully, to honor the men who died by not letting their deaths be forgotten or reduced to statistics in military records that no one reads. 31 Americans died on Route 509 on October 15, 1969. They died in an ambush that lasted 15 minutes. They died defending each other, fighting to survive, doing their jobs as soldiers in a war they didn't choose and probably didn't fully understand. They died and I survived. And I've spent 56 years trying to understand why, trying to find meaning in their deaths that justifies continuing to live while they don't. I don't have good answers. Don't have profound wisdom about war or sacrifice or the value of military service. Just have the truth of what happened. 15 minutes of chaos and violence and death on a dirt road in Vietnam that killed 31 Americans and changed everyone who survived. This is their story as much as mine. This is what happened on Route 509. This is what combat means when you strip away the strategy and politics and justifications. This is the reality that 31 families live with every day. That someone they love died young in a jungle on the other side of the world for reasons that still don't make sense after more than half a century. My name is Thomas Malone. I survived the ambush at Route 509 on October 15, 1969. 31 others didn't. This is what happened to us. This is what I carry. This is the truth that needs to be told before the last of us are gone, and these stories are lost to history. 15 minutes changed everything. 31 lives ended. The survivors, about 40 of us who made it through unwounded, were changed in ways that defined the rest of our lives. This is what war does. This is what ambush means. This is the price paid by soldiers who serve and the families who lose them. This is Route 509. This is October 15th, 1969. This is what happened. This is what it cost. This is what I remember.